Revelation 12:11 says, "And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." Welcome to the Word of Their Testimony podcast. Amen. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Missy.
Yes.
I'm really excited to have you in the studio, and I'm really excited to hear your story because I know it's going to be great. And I love you so much, and I am really thankful that we're in the same church family together, and I'm thankful I get to see you every Monday at L3, and you're just an amazing person, and thank you for being willing and courageous to come on here and share your story.
Yeah, thank you. And I learned so much from other people's testimonies as well. Like, that's the number one thing that fires me up and helps promote change in my own life as well. So just a little background story of me. I was raised Jewish. I went to synagogue as a kid, and we weren't like religious or anything, but I believed that there was a God. My mom taught at temple. It was more like a community, like a belonging in the community for me. So the rabbi would teach, and we would have festivals and just a lot of good times from there. But in all of that, it was more of just an identity. Like, this is who you are. You're Jewish. And of course, learning about the Holocaust, but I never really had like a relationship with God. So I can remember asking my mom, well, what's the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament? She's just like, well, we just believe the Old Testament, and kind of just left it at that. So when I was about 7 years old, my parents, there was a lot of strife in the house, I guess, because so much of my childhood I really blocked out. When I was an adult looking back, I didn't remember much of my childhood, but there were certain things that just stood out. And one of the first things that I feel like the Lord wanted me to share is I remember waking up in my room fully alert, and I look on my floor, and there's two armies. There's like little soldiers. I had no soldiers, okay? I was a girl. I didn't have toy soldiers, but there was toy soldiers, red and blue, and I actually saw them marching towards each other, and just curiosity of a child looking down, like, what's going on? I wasn't scared or anything like that. I was just more like in wonder, like, what is happening? And then when the two armies came together, as soon as they touched, it was the most awful sound that I had ever heard. It was the sound of like almost like 1,000 men screaming in warfare. It was horrendous. And I remember covering my ears and putting the pillow over my head and crying and just like, this is not supposed to be real. This is not supposed to be real. Why is this happening? So looking back as an adult, I realized that was like severe strife that was in my house. My parents were going through a divorce at that time. And God has always He's always reached me in a way that I would understand, like in supernatural ways. And I think that I can't say that that was God that allowed that for me to experience that, but I know that there is a spiritual side of things. So it was really hard. So my parents split up. I lived with my mother. I was more like my mom's friend growing up. I had way too much freedom, wasn't really protected in that sense. When I was in 8th grade, I had total freedom to do what I wanted. I actually got in a really bad situation and was raped. That's how I lost my virginity. And through that experience, that relationship, ended up getting pregnant, at 13 years old.
Wow.
And my older sister was 18 at the time. And so we both were pregnant at the same time.
Oh, wow.
So single mom. And she came to me and she said, Missy, we already have one baby on the way, and we can't have two. So I was forced to get an abortion, which I didn't want. So, I mean, you have to understand, like, 8th grade child really does not understand anything about sex, doesn't really understand anything about relationship and what that means, but I genuinely did not want to do that. So, I was taken to get an abortion, and the lady who did the ultrasound wouldn't even let me see it, and that tormented me for about 3 years. I had nightmares as a result of that. My sister ended up having her son, Brandon, who you'll hear about later in my testimony. I loved him dearly. And I think because of that, like a result of that, like I always equated Brandon with he was just a part of me, like he was like a son. He was my nephew, but he was always like a son to me. So I always loved him very, very much. So I ended up right before ninth grade. My mom moved to a different city a few hours away. So I moved to Jacksonville Beach. And turns out they had a high school there where I could have actually kept my baby. Like they had a high school where there was like a program for mothers and childcare on campus, which was crazy. So I mean,
that's amazing.
it could have worked. Yeah, it could have worked out. So I lived with my mother all through high school. Like I was sharing with you earlier, I was very just like pushing the limits. Like I want to be free. I want to pursue kindness and peace and just everything that comes with being wild and being a creative, because I was very much a creative. I certainly did like my fair share of drugs. And then when I was a senior in high school, my mom decided that she didn't want to live in Florida anymore. She wanted to move to Pennsylvania to pursue a relationship with somebody she'd met. So my mom had told me, well, Missy, I'm going to move to Pennsylvania, but I don't ever remember there being a conversation like on this day or anything like that. And I remember sitting in my room, it was at nighttime, and my mom's like, hey, I'm leaving for Pennsylvania in the morning. Whatever you want, pack it up. I was in complete shock. I was looking around my room of everything that I had from my childhood. What do you do in that moment? I wasn't like angry or anything. I was just like, what the hell do I even pack? So I had this little tiny suitcase, little pink suitcase, and I just randomly put some things in there. I still have those things to this day. So my mom dropped me off where I worked the next day so I could quit. So I was dropped off at McDonald's, and my mom left and moved to Pennsylvania. And I ended up moving in with my best friend, Bonnie, and her mom. And so we lived on Fort George Island. So that was like big turning point. And it actually was such a positive thing. Okay. Like Bonnie's mom was a single mom. She taught me kind of what normal was. Like she loved me. She met me where I was at. She was teaching me how to just be healthy. And of course, being with my best friend was amazing. We would have to take the ferry every day to get to school and then back because, I mean, we were on an island. We had peacocks in our yard.
Wow, that's so cool.
It was really neat. I look back on that as just some of my best memories. And I mean, meanwhile, my mom moved on to Pennsylvania and had to get her life back on track because things didn't work out. Love my mom to death. So anyways, I remember one day I got off the ferry and I was walking back to Bonnie's house, and it was, I want to say like a couple miles. So I was walking along the road and this lady stops and she's like, hey, do you want to ride? I'm like, okay. So I get in the car and immediately she asks me my name and asks if she can pray for me. And I'm just like, what the hell is happening? No, like for real. Like she put her hand on me and she's like, oh, Lord, bless her. And she's praying all this stuff, praying like good people would come into my life, like nothing weird, right? But it freaked me out so bad. I was terrified. And I turn around and I look in the back seat and there's these two little kids and they have progeria, where it's a disease that makes them age rapidly. So they looked like little old people. Like it scared me so bad. It scared me that she was praying for me like that. So, I don't even know if she realized how freaked out I was, but I was just like, okay, there's my house. And I didn't say goodbye to her. I got out, I slammed the door, and I ran as fast as I could to the house. I went in, I locked the door, I closed the curtains. I was like, I don't ever want to meet another person like that. It terrified me. All she did was pray for me.
Yeah.
Like that was it. Yeah, I was not used to like that kind of interaction, but like looking back, that's when things started to happen in my life. Like that's when good people started to come in and I could look back and I was like, wow, that was a turning point for sure. So fast forward a couple years. It was right before I turned 21 and I was hanging out with a friend. We used to be big in like the rainbow gatherings and traveling around. I don't know if you know anything about that, but like we were
the hippie lifestyle.
Total. We were like the second generation hippies. And so anything that involved peace and love, I was like, pull me into that because I want to just like eat it up. So I was hanging out with my friend and this person came to her door and started witnessing to her. And once again, I was very offended by that kind of interaction. And he just kept asking me now, like very presenting questions, like, if you were to die today, where would you go? And, asking me about my relationship with God. I'm just like, oh my gosh, just get out of here. That's what I was thinking. But I was very reserved and, trying to hold it in. He looked me dead in the eyes and he said, if you ask Jesus into your heart, he will prove himself to you. And I saw that this guy, as crazy, freaky as he was, like he actually had truth in his eyes. And I noticed that. I was like, this crazy guy believes exactly what he's saying. And I couldn't shake that. So I just kept thinking, like, it was going over and over in my head, like, who is this Jesus that can actually prove himself to me? So, like, the next day I was sitting on the beach and the sun was coming up. And, it's just beautiful. When you live at the beach, you see that day in and day out. It's not really anything out of the ordinary or spectacular, but it's pretty. So I'm sitting there and contemplating about Jesus. And I kept writing Jesus in the sand, but then I was ashamed of that name. I didn't even know what that name meant. So I would write it and it felt really good. Like something about writing that name just made me feel so good, but then I would erase it. Like I did this over and over. I don't even know how many times. I just write it. Felt good. No, I don't want to be identified with that. And then finally I just got to like my wits end and I was like, okay, if you're real, Jesus, come into my heart. It was almost like a whoever you are, whatever you are, just, and at that moment when I said come into my heart, I felt like, keep in mind, I was a total second generation hippie, but I felt like peace, like real peace that I had never experienced ever. And it felt like water inside of me, and it went from my stomach all the way up like, and it was the most amazing feeling. And when I opened my eyes, the whole ocean, I'm getting goosebumps right now, the whole ocean was just like magnified. Every ripple, every light fragmented, just intensified. Like I had never seen it like that before. Like I told you, I would see it day in, day out, but it was so different. Wow. And this wind like had come off the ocean that was not there before, and my hair was blowing back, and I was just like, you're real. Like, I don't know who you are or what you are, but I know you're real. Wow. And I feel like, looking back, that I needed something supernatural to open my eyes, because I never would have believed a single thing that anybody had told me based off of their experience. I had to experience things myself in order for it to be like a, like a truth or a foundation. Mm-hmm. So I left the beach that day going, yeah, Jesus is real. And I started telling people that. I was like, I don't know who Jesus is, but I'm telling you, he's real. And somebody's like, well, why don't you read the Bible? I was like, yeah, maybe I should. So I ended up going to a church. I just like picked a church, went to a church, and I'm sitting there in the service, and I noticed that same lady that picked me up on Heckscher Drive
No way.
years earlier was a few pews up. And I'm just like, wow, that's her. So after service, I walk up to her. I said, I don't know if you remember me, but you picked me up on this road. And she's like, I know exactly who you are. I was like, you were the first person to ever pray for me. And I just want you to know that, I have Jesus in my heart now, and I believe, and all these wonderful things happened as a result of you praying. And at that point, she's like crying. And her two children that were in the back seat had died at this point. So she calls her husband over. She's like, come here. She's like, tell him the story. And I tell her husband the story, and she's just like really just crying, and her heart is so touched. And I never saw her again after that, which is crazy. But it was like total divine appointment, you know, to know that like one prayer that didn't even seem to be received had so much impact. Wow. So I started to, when I asked Jesus into my heart, like, I'm telling you, it was like 360. Like, all of a sudden, my mind started to change the things I was into. I was dating a guy. We were getting ready to, like, move onto a commune. Like, and all of a sudden, I was, like, not attracted to him at all. Like, everything that I was, like, interested in was shifted just like that. It was, like, a new mindset. I just wanted to know who Jesus was. Like, that was my pursuit. So the person who ended up witnessing to me that I thought was a total freak had a surf ministry. So I actually got plugged into that.
That's so cool.
And got discipled through surf ministry, which was amazing. So I started going out and, sharing and praying for people, random people, doing street ministry. I started getting involved in homeless ministry, did that for a couple years. And yeah, I really just wanted to date Jesus at that point. I was like, I just want to know who you are. So that started a very beautiful journey of who God was early on in my life. And then, I used to go on mission trips. I would love to go on another one, actually. But I went to a mission conference. It was with Overland Missions, and one person's like, hey, I think you need to go to Brazil. That was one of the things they were offering. And like all other mission trips, I was like, I don't know, I'll pray about it. So I prayed about it, and God's like, yeah, go. So I ended up going to the Amazon River. I got to travel on the Amazon. That's where I met my husband.
How cool.
So had I not prayed about it and gone to Brazil, I wouldn't have the children that I have today.
Oh my goodness.
So it was totally meant to happen. It was a beautiful experience. We had on our boat a pet monkey. We had a pet piranha named Missy.
Oh my goodness.
That bit one of the guys. Yeah, it was crazy. So, like, just having that, like, going on mission trips really opened up my eyes for, like, a different worldview and a love for other cultures and a love for different people groups. And it was very special because I didn't want to bring any of my American ways into other cultures. You really want to respect who they are as people and, just share your love. Like, it was a beautiful just interchange of different cultures and just love for people. So I enjoyed doing mission work. A couple years after that, we were married and ended up getting pregnant. So that was like a whole new experience when you first get pregnant, especially after losing a baby, So this was like something very special to me. I was like, oh God, you're bringing new life and you do so many amazing things. So I already had like all this vision of what motherhood would be like. And unfortunately, we lost that baby. So we were in the hospital. The doctor came into the room, and he's like, I'm so sorry, but you lost your baby. The baby passed. And I just remember, like, it was like a freight train hit me, It was like all your dreams instantly vaporized and crushed. Like, the thing that you put so much love and hope into was now just obliterated. And I remember my father-in-law was in there with me, and he looked at me, and he said, Missy, I know this is really hard, but I feel like you need to give God thanks right now. And I just remember thinking, like, how could I possibly, like, how can you do that? Like, literally, you just find out that your child died. How do you do that? He said, I know it's so hard, but I really feel like you should do this. And I did. I don't know where the courage even came from, but there in the hospital room, I said, Lord, I thank you that you're still good regardless of this. And that prayer brought so much healing into my heart later on. And it was like a way of being able to let go and surrender and just knowing that God is still good, like despite the awful things that happen in our life. And we actually conceived 2 months later with my oldest son, Mikey. So he's my rainbow baby. And he's an amazing young man. All of my kids are amazing. Mikey, you say, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? He'll be like, well, I want to be a pastor or an engineer or a musician or, just like the world's wide open for them. And sometimes I think, well, if I would have had that child, then he wouldn't be here. So it's not like I'm thankful for the hard thing that happened. I just know that I'm thankful for him. So our testimony is not just the high points, like I'm riding high on top of the mountain. It's like, no, when you're covered in mud, when you're literally on your face and you can't get up and you're bruised and you're bleeding, where do you turn to? Where do you go? And I found that, like, at my lowest points in life, God is there. Even if I can't see the way out and I can't see the direction at that point, I know that he's with me. I've experienced a lot of really hard times in my life. And after becoming a Christian, realizing that he's always my source, I know that I can face any trial because he's going to pull me through. So that's given me, like, a lot of hope.
Even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for he is with us.
Yeah, totally. And just having, like, that identity of knowing who I am in him and not having to compare myself to other people, kind of like what Pastor Kyle was talking about, just about having a strong identity and not letting the world tell you who you are, but being okay with being different, being weird, being that awkward puzzle piece. Like, it's all okay. And I love that about humanity. I love individualism. I love creative minds. I love when people don't have to be just like their neighbor. You can just beautifully exist how you are. So I will talk about one thing that is more recent. I spent a lot of time just pouring into my children that purpose and identity. So as they were growing up for that next decade, just being a mom and becoming a teacher and trying to give a sense of adventure, put that into my children, and a sense of like, that you're a child of God. Like, those things were probably foundational for me and very important in the next decade of my life. So I remember, like, right before I had become a teacher, I worked for a company that flew me to Austin to do some training. I used to manage homes for adults with disabilities. And I remember when the plane descended into Austin, I had this overwhelming sensation that I had just come home. Wow. Like, it was so strong. Like when you go away on a vacation for a long time and you can't wait to get home, and you pull up in your driver, you're like, oh, I'm here. Well, I had that landing in an airplane. I had never been to Texas before. So I was like, I knew it was God, and I knew that God would eventually call us to Texas.
How did you know?
Because I knew the Lord at this point. So it was another one of those experiences. Like, I felt like I just had come home. Wow. And I went back and I told my husband, I was like, oh, we're going to move to Texas. He's like, there's no way I'm ever moving to Texas. And it took 3 years to convince. And then finally, when he got confirmation, literally it was like a month and a half, we had to fix our house up, put our house on the market, show our house, sell our house, pack everything up, get new jobs, get the kids enrolled in school, move, like everything, boom, boom, boom. And I was like, if this is going to happen, this is going to be a miracle. And it happened exactly like that. We had already made connections and stuff with people in Texas at that point. So even when we arrived in our moving truck, we had people there that I had never even met before that were helping us unload our moving van. I got hired like pretty much the day before school started. It was just so God. So I love to hear, like, people are like, oh, I came to Texas and this is the story. I'm like, yes, I got one of those too.
Yeah. I was saying, like, my story is kind of like that too. It's crazy. It's like God's bringing in all these people in so many miraculous ways to this area. It's just...
Yeah, it's like wild. When God's calling you to Texas, you can be assured that it's going to be pretty rocking.
Amen to that.
This is a place where I think revival is being birthed, actually.
I agree.
In our region.
Yeah.
So we'd lived in Texas for, I think, like 6.5 years or something like that. And a few years back, my sister I also had agreed. Brandon, that's my nephew, Brandon had relapsed again. And he needed to get treatment. And we both thought that coming from Alabama and going into a new environment, a new state, would be a fresh start, starting over. And, I've always loved him. And so we invited him into our lives here. And he went through treatment. And then he ended up living with us after that. And it was an amazing experience. When people think about somebody who's in addiction, oftentimes they don't have an accurate picture. They see addiction as, okay, it's just somebody using, it's throwing their life away, like everything shit's going to hell in a handbasket kind of thing. And that's not what addiction is. Addiction is a person who genuinely is struggling to find hope. And through addiction and recovery, there's so much hope that's birthed. So what we saw from Brandon was he was such a life source to us and in my family. He oftentimes would be the counselor, that would sit down and just listen to both sides. Or he would be the one to pour into my children over teaching them how to make a meal. Or he would be the one that would want to have coffee with you on the porch and just philosophize about, like, different things. And he always had this beautiful angle of life and truth and kind of whatever chaos seemed to be going on. Brandon always was like, hey, this is really how things are. So he kind of like brought a settling to our house as well. But with addiction and being a family member, I did not understand addiction. I had this facade in my mind that when somebody goes through recovery that they're fixed, right? Like you go through a treatment center and you're fixed. And it's not that case. And I didn't know with addiction that there's shame and there's hiding and you conceal and you cover. And so I really very much at that point didn't confront those issues when I started to see that thing happening. I really just wanted to be the loving aunt and okay, you just live your life and here's some freedom. Come join us for meals and we love you. And that's not how you want to interact with somebody who's an addict. You want to love them like a hug is felt from the front, not from behind. But you have to be real and you have to deal with those hard areas too. If you really care about somebody, you can't just love them. You have to be transparent and encourage transparency in community. So
That's good.
you know, it was really hard. Brandon relapsed, and at that point, he moved out. And I'll just skip ahead shortly after that. Brandon's relapse ended in a fentanyl overdose. And I remember finding out my sister contacted me when I was at church, and it was one of the worst experiences when you find out that your loved one is dead. I won't go into the traumatic experiences after because it's too much. I went through a lot of grief counseling. I even, through God, once again, being there for me in my lowest times, literally when you feel your heart has been ripped out, and not just my heart, but my family's heart. Like we all were traumatized by that. There was forgiveness. I was the one who found the pills. And then once we got into his phone and records, I realized that the person who gave him the pills was somebody that I had invited into my family. So, you know, that was hard because that was an additional betrayal of, you know, how could you do that you don't realize what you did. You not only caused a death, but you caused a death among death among death. Like it multiplied. So I literally hated this person. Like through God's forgiveness and grace and mercy, was able to forgive her along with my sister and some other family members. And it was a beautiful experience when we confronted her with, hey, I need you to know the trauma that you caused. And she took responsibility for it. And then I felt like the Holy Spirit said, ask her how it affected her. And I'd never thought about that before. So I asked her, and she was able to then open up her heart and share that, yeah, it had traumatized her as well. And I genuinely forgave her. I genuinely wished her well. To this day, I wish her the best. I don't hold a single fault against her. And I realized that, you know, no matter what side of the road you're on, when a trauma happens, it affects everybody. And oftentimes we want to point the finger and say, that was the enemy or that was the person at fault, when, you know what? We live in a fallen world.
Yeah.
We all are going to disappoint each other at some point. So I try to look at people as we're all a work in process. And there's always redemption and there's always forgiveness.
Amen.
And that helps me, I think, to have a better outlook on life of just what redemption is. Because then I can look at myself through the same lens of, you know what, I'm highly flawed. Anybody who knows me intimately will say the same exact thing, but I'm a work in process, and I'm okay with that. You know, Brandon's death brought a new purpose into my life. All of the beautiful attributes that I loved about him and how he loved people, I definitely can say that I have taken that into my heart as my own personal ministry of just wanting to be present with people, wanting to love them no matter where they're at, and wanting to be just a source of love. I think that that's probably some of my biggest goals in life, is just to be genuinely who God called me to be. Maybe I don't even fully know what that looks like, but I know that each day is a new opportunity to show that grace and that love to people. So I try to do that across the different avenues of people that I meet.
And I see that. I see that in action, like just the way you move and the way you interact with people and the way you hold space for them and see them for who they are and celebrate them. And you have just that special light about you. And even just sitting here, hearing you just talk about the way you see the world and the way you experience things, I was just thinking to myself, like, just being in your space, I automatically feel like permission to be like everything I've dreamed to be, but I'm like afraid to like fully unleash because of like, you know, what other people might think. But like, you just create this atmosphere around you where it's like, you know, just fully express who God created you to be. And I love that that's who God made you to be. It's like a chain reaction. You invite others to step into who God called them to be. That's incredibly beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want anybody to be like another person, you know? Like that's the beauty of the creation is we're all called to be something different. Mm-hmm. And just the fact that we have this amazing life, we're gifted with breath, and that we get to, you know, walk this path together. It's really an astonishing thing.
Thank you so much, sister, for sharing your story.
Thanks for inviting me.
That was so powerful, and I love you, and I'm very thankful to call you my sister in Christ.
Thank you, Corinne.
If you were blessed by this episode, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future testimonies. And if you want to pass on the blessing to others, please leave a review and share to your page. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.